is the principal handling Indonesia for Tractus, which is a very interesting company. He will tell you more about what they do, but really it's a market entry strategy company that helps companies really mobilize much more quickly. If it takes this long to implement a project, whether it's in China or India, they compress it, or in ASEAN, they compress that timeline and really show a lot of. So while they have some legal acumen, they're really excellent advisors. Specific to Daniel, though, I was interesting. I mean, someone who's probably been to boot camp. He was in the Peace Corps here in northern Thailand. His Thai is probably better than mine. I'm sure it probably is. But also has had a passion in Southeast Asia, having gone to the University of Wisconsin where he earned his MBA and focused in Southeast Asian studies. Would you please welcome Daniel to give us proper thing here.
I used to live in Thailand. I was here from 2006 to 2008. I didn't have the pleasure to live here in Bangkok. I was in a very small village called Chatrakan in northern Pisanulok, and so it was quite one knock. ไม่มีร้านอาหารก็ไม่มีร้านเลยก็มีแต่เป็นคนม้าแล้วก็เป็นกินกับเพื่อนเองก็กินเหล้าบ้างก็ได้ก็สนุกดี But I'm very happy, and so a little bit about my past is I was here in Thailand, and then I went back to America and got my graduate degree, and I love the region, and I really wanted to come back out to Southeast Asia. I think it's probably the most exciting geography on Earth right now for growth and for business development. We are seeing some countries, Singapore, which is quite sophisticated, and considered the most developed place in Southeast Asia, which I find personally a little bit boring when I go there because it doesn't have that vibrant emerging market feel such as a Bangkok or a Jakarta, or that less developed feel such as a Phnom Penh or a Yangon. So after I finished that, I had the opportunity where I then went to live in Jakarta. I've been in Jakarta for the past 5 years, and I've been running the Tractus office in Indonesia for 3 years now. For Tractus ourselves, it was put very well. We are a foreign direct investment and trade promotion, investment attraction consulting company. We're focused on market entry. Some of the things we do, we work with a diversity of clients. What we started with was on manufacturers. When a lot of American companies are coming out to Southeast Asia for that export-led growth here in Southeast Asia. But as we all know, times have changed, and so now Southeast Asia has looked at a market for export itself as well, where a lot more companies are coming out to supply to the local market, lift added value of the countries, decrease the cost of logistics and whatnot. So what we do is we run the value chain of market entry strategies for companies. Whether it's initial market research to get an understanding. As you also know, many of these markets, it's very difficult to get information. So we'll dig for you to get that information and that critical information so you can better consider the market. We'll do help with partner matching. We'll help with negotiations. We do site selection analysis. And so on, regulatory analysis. And on that, we also work with a number of states and provinces from either the United States, Canada, or Europe to do help with their trade promotion, investment attraction. And Indonesia. So I've been in Indonesia for, again, 5 years. It's always been that land of opportunity. And it still is that land of opportunity. This past year, I think, highlights the challenges and difficulties that the country faces. Indonesia is, of course, the largest country in Southeast Asia. It's an archipelago consisting of over 17,000 islands. There's over 250 million people. Indonesia has no idea how to count them because there are so many islands in rural areas that the census does not reach. So there are quite a few people, and my colleague, who's actually just in India and joined me in Indonesia, he's come in and he says, I have never seen so many pregnant women and babies in any city in my entire life. And so this goes along with the favorable population demographic. This chart here, this is Fdi density per region. As you can see, the country is quite spread out. This is the island of Java, where most of the economic concentration is. The vast majority here in Jakarta and West Java. So majority of the factories and the foreign direct investment comes on in here. Surabaya area, we are getting some better pricing in East Java and in Central Java. So we're starting to see some manufacturing such as garments and textiles moving out, and some of the other more labor intensive. But as most of the industry is concentrated around Jakarta, we're still seeing that there. Up here in Balikpapan, that's where we have a lot of the palm oil and mining assets from Kalimantan, and then palm in the center of Medan for shipping and logistics. And then we go out east, and it becomes pretty sparse. Indonesia's had a hard time spreading out its investment and its industry across the country. Indonesia is the elephant in the room here for ASEAN. It accounts for about 40% of the ASEAN's economy, as well as 40% of the population. GDP growth in 2014 is 5%. The total GDP is well above any of the other ASEAN countries. It's more than double that of Thailand. Local consumption makes up 60%. And so Indonesia really, I think it often gets forgotten here in the mainland Southeast Asia. It's not very well known in the United States, where I'm from as well. Where I'll tell people, yes, I live in Indonesia, in Jakarta. They'll ask me, they'll say, hey, is that near Bali? And I always find that quite funny, being that, you know, Bali is just a very small island in the middle of Indonesia, while Jakarta, a city that probably has about 20 million people and the worst traffic on earth, is not known at all. And here's just a little bit of the demographics. And so I'm sure you've heard that Indonesia is very exciting for FMCG, for consumer markets, mobile phones, upcoming technologies. That's because of the young age demographic, which I spoke about earlier, as well as their emerging middle class. You know, we have our range here, where it's this range of 42% of the population is making between 60 and 120 million rupiah a year, which is about $5,200 to about $12,000. Per capita GDP is about $3,500. And so that's the household income there. Indonesia also has a huge labor force. What's interesting about the large labor force there is that manufacturing as a percentage of GDP has actually declined. On a gross basis, it has grown over the past 20 years, but as part of the economy itself, it's actually declined. And that has to do with some of the manpower regulations, uncertainty in doing business, infrastructure issues, land acquisition, and some of the typical challenges people find very frustrating in Indonesia. Tertiary enrollment and the intelligence in the quality of schools. 27% is going to university or tertiary education, and so that's improving. Although the university have been actually dropping in global rankings lately. So the government administration is always considering how to improve their education system, as it's sorely needed. But they keep flip-flopping on what their curriculum will be. They used to have a thing where they were going to prioritize nationalism and religion and decrease the amount of English and science taught in schools. They said that's a bad idea, and so they're going back and trying to make some more revisions again. Everything we hear, you know, with Indonesia is the challenging logistics. Logistics are more than 0.25% of GDP in the way that some of these research agencies calculate it, and this is why up here. This is Jakarta during rush hour. People here in Bangkok say, oh, rot deep mak, oh, mayak by night lay. And I'm like, oh, please come down to Jakarta so you can really see what the real traffic is. You know, so if you're leaving for the airport, you won't know if it takes 1 hour to get to the airport or it might take 3 hours. If it rains, you can maybe double that. What's so lovely about living in Bangkok is you can get outside of the city very easily. Big issue in Jakarta is on the weekend, when you have a city of 14 million people that's stuck in a concrete jungle, they all want to get out. And so even when you leave the city, it's going to take you 4 to 6 hours to get to somewhere green and pretty and nice, unless you're leaving at 4 or 5 in the morning. And so it gets to be a relatively challenging environment for that leisure. The seaports are still underdeveloped, but those are underway. Over the past year or two and into the near future, they're making significant improvements. Tanjung Priok, the main port in Jakarta, is undergoing renovations right now and is getting larger. They're working on a couple of other deep water ports. Airports being at the 17,000 islands, it's difficult to get there. You don't want to go by the boat. A friend of mine who recently joined Tractus, he was brave enough to take the boat from Lombok, which is just east of Bali, up to Sulawesi. and it was 52 hours of boat ride in cabins where they still smoke kretek, those are the clove cigarettes, on the inside of the cabin, and just served nasi goreng or fried chicken the whole time. And so he says that when he traveled Asia for 9 months or so, that was one of the most challenging experiences he's had. So being that that's difficult, most people fly. I fly. After I finished Peace Corps, I took the train, and it was also a horrible logistical experience. And so, but they're looking to make improvements. The budget this year was $23 billion for logistics, or for infrastructure development. That's come out a little bit slow the first half of the year, although we've seen that pick up in the second half of the year, where they're hoping that infrastructure development will stimulate the economy as well, as we all know, as it's been slowing. This is more on the infrastructure. They have actually started their MRT, which is fantastic. It's not going as fast as we would like, because that's along the main business street, Sudirman, but it is underway. Back in '98, during the financial crisis, which Thailand is also very familiar with, they had started a monorail then, but you can still see the concrete pylons along a number of the roads. They've still abandoned that project, but they've actually made great progress on this MRT, and it's going to be a main line going from South Jakarta up to North Jakarta, which will at least relieve some of the pressure in the center of the city. They've also they've commissioned China to do not a high-speed rail, but a fast rail going out from Jakarta to Bandung. That's meant to kick off soon. And they're also going to build a light rail from the center of Jakarta out to the airport as well, to kind of be able to give you a little predictability that you'll be able to catch your flight. Another big project that they're doing is the Trans-Sumatran Highway that is undergoing. The Trans-Jawa Highway is still going through. But the biggest issue with building this infrastructure has been land acquisition. It was 2 years ago they passed the land acquisition law. Those implementing regulations still are not out yet. So it is still not a clear way where the government can seize the land to be able to build the infrastructure that's necessary to improve the country, reach out to more rural areas, and incorporate the rest of the country into the economy. This is going to be a necessity for Indonesia going forward, but we are still seeing some progress. And this is just a little bit the quality of infrastructure. You know, we're not as good as Thailand at all. I'm always impressed with how the infrastructure here in Bangkok is improved and expanding. It seems like a maze of twists and turns of roads here, but they all get you out of the city quite quickly. That's not the case, and I don't think it's highlighted in these charts here how much more challenging Indonesia is. This is just a little bit about the economy, and it's quite surprising that you hear so much about Indonesian industry, mining, oil and gas, manufacturing, you know, that they have over the 250 million people of young workers that could be working in manufacturing, but yet services still overshoots that. Tourism is not as big in Indonesia as it is in Thailand, although Bali is quite large, and they're growing in the tourist numbers in Indonesia. But then transport and communications, you know, the logistics business is large. Telecoms, trade, hotel and restaurants, things like that, these are all growing. Industry, again, construction, mining, and automotive have been some of the hot industries there. Automotive, Indonesia was #1 for automotive probably about 2 or 3 years ago in terms of growth. That's since dropped off exceptionally, while motorcycles have dropped off as well. A good example of the challenges automotive was facing, and probably a business challenge as well, is that GM, they had reopened a plant in 2012 for one of their MPVs there at the city, and they had closed that plant in late 2014 due to the lack of sales. You know, it was a pricing issue where Toyota quite dominates there with their typically low-cost Avanzas or Innovas. And then agriculture, although a small percentage of GDP, that's still a large portion of employment, which is typically characterized of smallhold properties and small village agriculture there. There isn't quite as much commercial agriculture as would be thought of outside of the industries of palm oil, cocoa, rubber, and sugar. There we do have some large-scale agriculture. It's surprising, actually, Indonesia imports a majority of its tropical fruits from Thailand, such as the durian and kanun and all that. That's often imported from Thailand, and so I don't mind because it's delicious from here, and I appreciate that. But they are looking to ramp that up, and I notice many of the attendees here are Thai itself, So if you're looking at opportunities to invest in Indonesia, areas such as added value agriculture, agricultural technologies such as how to plan and develop your agricultural systems for efficiency enhancements, food processing, ingredients, these are all great opportunities for Thai companies to come down. F&B, Thailand has done such a great job for food and beverage that Indonesia could really use some of your expertise where they'd be happy to take some of the information and knowledge from their northern neighbor rather than the Americans that come in and knock on the door and go to the Chamber of Commerce and bring the ambassador in to talk about these high-level legal challenges. And so I think Thai companies would have that nice soft touch to be able to go and excel. We are starting to see some Thai companies come in, especially which was surprising to see a foreign company come in Siam Cement, is the industry such as that where it's not difficult, it's capitally expensive to start a cement company, and they have some large state-owned enterprises doing cement in Indonesia, and large privately owned companies that are owned by rich and powerful people of Indonesia. But Siam Cement has been successful in coming in, and they are active in supplying the country with their concrete needs. Indonesia is part to a number of the trade pacts. Of course, we're focused here on AEC a little bit. We have discussed before that end of 2015, 2016 is going to be a slow start, where I think we're all going to be looking to each country trying to implement AEC into their national regulations and implement across their ministries. We also see the various free trade agreements. There's the Indonesia-Pakistan free trade agreement. They have economic cooperation with Japan. And then we're looking at the TPP and RCEP as well. And I think this is on everyone's radar at the moment. Jokowi, the president of Indonesia, announced that they're going to try to get out the TPP. But Indonesia has a long way to go restructuring their trade regime before they could really come on with the TPP requirements. So that's going to take some time. They are quite bullish on RCEP though. And so we would probably see RCEP coming in to play sooner than a TPP agreement if the negotiators are actively pushing that along. Just a little bit about imports and exports. It's interesting to see that both the top import and export is oils and fuels. That's true due to production sharing contracts and whatnot in the foreign oil and gas companies there. They do export quite a bit of fuel, but they have to import almost an equal amount to fill fuel demand. We've got the increase in number of motorcycles and cars and whatnot, and so Indonesia also used to subsidize their fuel very heavily, and so there was no incentive to consume less. You'd have taxi drivers leaving their cars on to use the air conditioning for 2 or 3 hours longer, drivers doing the same, truck drivers and whatnot, and so that was a little bit inflated, but that need is there. But overall, what I just like to highlight here is that their imports are typically of capital. They need their capital goods, intermediate products, chemicals, processed iron and steels, things like that. The exports are typically more raw materials. Fats. They have some electronic equipment, but this is low level. Rubber products, miscellaneous small level chemical products, wood products, manufacturers, things like that. And so that's what Indonesia is most famous for on their export side, is that of natural resources. This is just a comparison of FDI. This is from 2013. We can see Singapore has the most FDI, but I think a lot of this goes into that holding company strategy that we saw before. And we also see a lot of this money from Singapore coming down to Indonesia. And we see out of the rest of the ASEAN 10, Indonesia is the second largest recipient of FDI. And we can see that trend. For the past years, the FDI has been going up quarter on quarter, each and every year. Indonesia wasn't hit very, very heavily by the global financial crisis in 2008. That wasn't the large hit. And then we've seen it come up and up and up, with each year breaking the next. This year is going to be the same, where it's estimated that Indonesia is going to have about $40 billion in foreign direct investment this year. This is a little bit about the sectors the money that the FDI is going into, where mining is still the most significant, even though some of the regulatory challenges where they have the mineral export ban that has come in. But this also is going to take into account the companies that are investing into smelters, that are looking to process Indonesia's raw materials into more added value products. and then transport and communication, metal, machinery, electricity, gas, and water. And so we are seeing these investments going to increase that added value of Indonesia in their production. Indonesia isn't cheap enough, even with its 250 million people, many of them underemployed, that it's not still, labor-intensive industries. They're really moving up the ladder for added value, as they're not quite as competitive with some of the neighboring countries and just labor-intensive. And so we are seeing the investment comes in, and we are seeing Indonesia make a solid push to get this added value, although some of the times the policy, the way they do their business policy doesn't make sense, and frustrates people and deters investment. But we are still seeing the improvements. This is by country. Singapore is the #1 investing country in Indonesia now, which is at 16%, and Malaysia accounts for 14%. So we're seeing Southeast Asia very represented in the foreign direct investment coming in. We also have the British Virgin Islands, and so I think we're seeing a lot of action into Indonesia through that holding company model. Being the legal challenges and tax challenges, it is probably a good strategy. Some of our other counterparts here today can probably explain a little bit more about how to use that facility to invest into Indonesia. But they are trying to improve this. They're trying to instigate a number of investment incentives or make improvements to the same investment incentives that they've had. The tax holiday is changing. They're increasing the years of tax exemption that can come in. So it's 5 to 15 years tax exemption for up to 20 years in strategic industries. So there's about 7 industries that will qualify. It could be up to 10 to 100% reduction in pioneer industries. So, machinery, if you're developing a new machinery in Indonesia, you could probably get a large reduction in that tax for that pioneer industry. That being said, the threshold is quite high. It's at $100 million for that investment to be able to get the tax holiday. So the full the tax allowance is looking to be improved as well. 30% of investment value reduction over 6 years, so that's going to be 5% per year on your investment. And they really opened up the businesses that can apply for it, so 143 business segments. What's better for this is, so even though that they had these incentives before, no one wanted to apply for them because the process was so challenging and difficult and time-consuming. So most companies did not apply. The government, through BKPM, that's the Investment Coordinating Board, has guaranteed that they're going to shorten and make it easier to go through that process. We're going to see a little bit more about that later. And then, as in many of the countries, for import duty facility, they have 0% import duty for machinery, raw materials that are for export, or the capital goods for supporting your industry. This is a little bit about the taxes. We are not a tax consultant. My specialty is not tax. I have it here just as a reference. You'll notice that the taxes from a presentation that was yesterday, Indonesia's taxes are a little bit higher than most of ASEAN. What we heard as well, though, that they're looking to reduce this corporate income tax to about 17.5%. To look a little bit more competitive and to bring forward that investment. Moreover, Indonesia has had a huge problem with their tax collection rate. It's long been known that it wasn't difficult to pay a smaller amount directly to the tax collector rather than you just paying your taxes in a normal legal way. And so the goal of Indonesia is to really just widen that tax base, whether they're getting a lesser number of taxes on a percentage base from their same typical targets. They want to widen that base where they're collecting taxes from more Indonesian companies as well as foreign companies. So this is an issue both foreign and domestic that Indonesia is really trying to overcome. This year, 2015, has been quite challenging. If you notice, 98 was a very challenging time for Southeast Asia, and it was probably one of the most challenging times for Indonesia. But on a currency basis, about 2 months ago, the currency was edging up. It was edging up not too far from its peak in 98. I liked it myself because then I got a 20% discount on all the products. And so I was like, wow, it's fantastic. I can go out, eat at all the nice restaurants, have some nasi padang, some kalapas. It was great. but it has since bounced back marginally since then. So the current exchange rate is about 1,000 per dollar is 13,500 rupiah, and so we're off the lows of the rupiah. And so when it was at the 14,500, we really saw a hit in consumer confidence, where we really drooped in September, where retail, I have a number of friends in e-commerce as well as retail, they said this quarter might have had a 40% hit in sales and revenues. On the ease of doing business, Indonesia has improved from last year. They were at 114 last year. We're at 109 this year. Not great still. They still have a long way to go, but they are working on improvements. Corruption is still a significant issue. It is worse than Thailand, and so again, this is something similar to the traffic. Kind of say, oh, corruption, such problem. But Indonesia's worse. It is a challenging place to do business, but the size and the business potential is what attracting people there. These are some of the other challenges, and so we'll get into the kind of political issues that are going on. Just the 17,000 islands makes it difficult to do business in. It's hard to transport your stuff around. It's hard to send things out to distant customers. In acquiring land when you have to go through, and remember, Indonesia is a decentralized government, so they pushed a lot of the powers down to the local provincial level. And so one of the things they miss is when Suharto was in power, because then you only had to pay one guy to get your business done. You just paid to the top, it was done, you'd sign, and you'd go along. Now you have to pay along the value chain. So you have the national level you have to go through, you have to figure out your licensing there. You have your next level where you're going at a regional level, and then you might be at the provincial level, and then you'll be at the local level. And so if you're in an industry such as forestry or mining, this could be incredibly difficult, which leaves certainty. If you're an American company, there's FCPA, that's going to be an issue. Just frustration in times. And so that decentralization is a challenge for a lot of foreign investors. There are demonstrations quite often. They're typically labor demonstrations that are typically in Jakarta around SEZs, looking for new wages. And we also have issues with land acquisition, where villages will camp out to stop the seizure of land and whatnot. And so that's another challenge with the infrastructure, to be able to open up the country for that infrastructure development. And then we have a new president in. This is Jokowi. He came in with a lot of hope for him to be the man of change. He was looked at as kind of the Obama of Indonesia. What's happened is he's in a similar place as Obama, with the challenges that he faced. The political opposition party, Merah Putih, is strong, and they're running a strong opposition. We have a group of people that's from the Muhammadiyah, which is a part of a Muslim sect that has a strong political power. They have a constitutional jihad going on right now as well, where they're looking at areas within the Constitution that they can repeal to reallocate these. It's really a sort of rent sinking, so they can reallocate the rent sinking. So there's a lot of confusion going on with the political parties. Golkar, which is the largest political party, has a rift right down the center. Abrizal Bakri, who's typically one of the richest Indonesians and strongest politicians, has had a strong falling out. He tried to run against Jokowi, but pulled out of the race earlier due to other issues. And so Indonesian politics is all over the place right now. So we are seeing a power grab, and we don't know who is going to be in a place. Jokowi has picked it up a little bit, and we're seeing a little bit more progress going forward. And he seems to be building some momentum. So this first year was challenging. One thing that we are happy about is that when he was governor of Jakarta, his vice governor, who is now the current governor, Ahok, is really getting things done in the city. The rivers are getting cleaned up, infrastructure is improving, and the city is seeing a lot of progress right now. Again, corruption. And then we heard about it earlier, Indonesia's negative investment list. This came out, they had a revised negative investment list last year that came out. You can reference it online. It's at the BKPM website. It's underneath one of the pull-down screens, so you can see which industries are protected and which industries can be invested in by foreigners. And so Indonesia's really been walking this line of whether to regulate or to be open. All the rhetoric we've been hearing so far this year has been business openness, and that has been rhetoric. And we've heard a lot of it. This new hope of Jokowi, business friendly, we're going to speed things up, we're going to bring investment. Heard a lot of rhetoric. And so maybe they put some systems in place at the high national level, rolling these out into the provinces and having it be active, able to be planned, able to have things worked out is going to take a while. We're also seeing some flip-flopping and some going back and forth. One of the things that was concerned to me, we run a small office in Jakarta. They had made a ratio of for every one expat you need to have 10 local employees. This is in comparison to before when it was one expat for 3 employees. And they also wanted to implement a mandatory Bahasa Indonesia proficiency test for all expats living in Indonesia. They have just recently taken that off the table. So, alhamdulillah, we are okay, and it's not going to be such a stressful thing getting in foreign labor. Getting your work permit is still a challenge. I just got mine one day before I had to leave the country to get out of here. It took 3 months to get the work permit. And so there are still challenges in there, although we aren't going to be as beat up. One of the other things that was strange what you're seeing is they're really trying to stimulate the oil and gas industry. But they said to be an expat working in oil and gas, you can't be over like 58 years old. Now, I don't understand why you wouldn't want someone older than 58 years old that's going to have the most experience, most capable of training, and has the patience to work with people of different levels of ability and skill to bring it up. But Indonesia didn't want these people to be coming in any longer. They wanted to keep younger people within the oil and gas industry around longer, which typically want to move on from country to country as they increase their positions. So, and then again, going back to things like the constitutional jihad, mineral export bans, and then we have some big cases that we've seen over the past few years of foreign companies really taking a hit. There was the case, was it Churchill Mining? They had a humongous coal concession, which was where they had the legal land permit to, but there was a counterclaim on it of one of the rulers of one of the bigger political parties where they laid claim to it. And so that ended up being a loss of about $1 billion in investment. We also saw the Rothschilds have serious issues with the Bumi resources. You may have seen that in the news. There was also a big coal mining business scandal, if you will, that was challenging for the foreign investors. In Indonesia, it is very rare that a foreign investor will win in court. Again, we'll echo what was said yesterday, that arbitration is the preferred method of legal proceedings in Indonesia because there is some favorability for the locals. But again, they are looking to deregulate. These are recent announcements. We've got 5 packages since September 9th. Another package just recently came out, and the 9th package is just delayed. So these are quite high level. All the details have not come out yet. These will be characterized as the national government starts to figure it out. But deregulation and bureaucratic reform, that's a big one. And that's going to be a lumbering, slow process. They have started, again, I just went through getting my work permit. They've started putting some systems into place to make that process faster. The challenges that it makes is that no one at the front line actually knows what to do with the new procedures. And so that actually slows everything down. So this year's a little bit more challenging, but we're looking for the efficiencies in the coming years going forward. Accelerating strategic projects, we're seeing the infrastructure come out better. They've lowered the level they're allowing foreigners to buy property now, although I think that to buy an apartment it's at about $350,000 for that apartment. So they're keeping that property ownership at the high level. This second package, they start rolling out what they're looking to do at BKPM. Simplification of investment license, improving fiscal incentives, tax cuts for importers. These are coming into play. Again, BKPM is moving a little bit slowly with their business reforms and their one-stop shop, but it is happening and it is going forward. They're playing with their fuel subsidy line, and it's easy to do when oil prices are so low right now. So we'll see how this happens in the coming future. They want to stimulate micro lending, entrepreneurship, things like that. And they're trying to roll out the implementing regulations for land acquisition. The other ones we're getting more into manpower and wages, and stimulus for small businesses. And again, so all of these have just come out, and none of them are very clear yet. So that's the point. It's hard for us to be very specific on any of the legal regulatory issues going on in Indonesia right now, as we are seeing plenty of changes, and there aren't many people at all that can definitively say how something will work out perfectly. Will it work out? Most likely, if you keep your patience and remain steadfast in going forward and work through the appropriate channels and keep pushing, you can get it done. It is still a fantastic place to do business. It does just take some patience. And so what will we see going forward? We are having the road going forward. This year will be another record year for investment into Indonesia. It is still incredible potential where, unlike Bangkok, unlike Thailand, there's many services left unprovided. Simple services. Things that are really necessary is customer service training. This is something really necessary in Indonesia to lift the standard of service in providing to the people, providing to customers, investors and whatnot, that information that's necessary and that feeling that you want to do business in Indonesia. But this is the Trans-Sumatran Freeway being built, going forward. We are seeing lots of changes. This thing will probably change a number of times because there was a challenge in it before, but it will go forward and it will expand and reach out into the more distant areas of Indonesia to open up the economy, get some of the people out of Jakarta while you send industry away from the capital, and really economically involve those people living in the periphery. So I'm very hopeful living in Indonesia. I've always been an optimist of Indonesia. I hope they can work through some of their challenges and keep that momentum going forward for reform and keeping more open arms to foreign investors. And going back to the Thais working there and investing in Indonesia, I really do think there is huge opportunities for you to go down and work. I'd be happy to help. If you ever want to come down, Iพูดไทยได้ก็เป็นไทยไลน์เที่ยวที่ไหนก็ได้จะกินอาหารอร่อยๆนะ